Game of Thrones ended disappointingly after owning a television and the pop culture trend for most of the 2010s. One of the most contentious finales ever to air on television marked the end of HBO's version of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. But in Game of Thrones, this wasn't the only contentious decision. Controversial creative decisions that either deviated too much from the original work's intent or could have been better choices made throughout production led to the ending. Game of Thrones may return at some point, but it will take a long time to be free of the stigma and effects of its contentious decisions. Let's kick things off with the first controversial choice that Game of Thrones made. Many jaded viewers questioned why House of the Dragon has even been produced in light of Season 8's numerous flaws and infamy. In their opinion, House of the Dragon was a sequel that no former Game of Thrones fan requested. Even the idea of going back to Westeros infuriated them. In all fairness, the Game of Thrones prequel received many positive reviews and accolades, but they needed to be sufficient to bring back all Game of Thrones viewers. House of the Dragon was ignored, mainly by Game of Thrones dissatisfied viewers, while those still bothered by Season 8 thought that its presence put salt in an open wound. Fans were initially worried when it was revealed that Season 8 would only have 6 episodes and would be the series' last. In retrospect, this was a huge warning sign. To complete every character's personal story and all of Westeros' political intrigue, Game of Thrones needed more episodes and seasons. It was later discovered that HBO had offered to give the showrunners as many seasons as they desired, but David Benioff and D.B. Weiss had turned it down. The rumor was that they planned to hastily wrap up Game of Thrones so they could go on to a possible Star Wars project. This further infuriated fans. Here's another somewhat controversial choice of the Game of Thrones fans. Like any other novel adaptation, Game of Thrones makes some crucial adjustments to the plot of its source material. However, in Season 5, Game of Thrones developed a personality. After this, the series diverged from the books and began telling its narrative, one of the most significant and most expensive errors in the entire series. Game of Thrones significantly increased its cheer-worthy fan service after departing from canon. To hasten to the conclusion, the show also abandoned its painstaking pace and characterizations. Although adaptations are inevitable, Game of Thrones should have paid closer attention to the source material and George R.R. Martin's original intent. Not only that, but readers were outraged by Dorne's mistreatment and exclusion. Despite its renown, Dorne was only powerful in its name. House Martell was one of the weakest families in the war for the rule of Westeros, and Dorne played a minimal role in it. By the end of Season 8, practically everyone connected to Dorne had passed away or worse. This was different in the book, making Dorne a feared powerhouse. In Game of Thrones, Dorne and the Martells are portrayed as incapable and feeble. This disservice left readers justifiably enraged, and newcomers similarly disappointed. It's difficult to avoid the conclusion that the showrunners had no interest in Dorne, even though there's no formal explanation for this controversial modification. Did you notice in the series magic was given lesser attention? Because many others did. Magic was a powerful force in Westeros. According to the novels, the gods were present but unseen, and many characters experienced or used magic. In Game of Thrones, magic also existed, but it was given less attention. Euron Greyjoy, a formidable wizard in the books but a typical pirate in the series, is an excellent illustration of this. This lack of magic impacted some characters and missed the book's point. A Song of Ice and Fire dismantled dark fantasies by demonstrating how magic would only exacerbate a feudal society. Magic served as a useful plot device in the Game of Thrones, giving some people an advantage, or it was merely present to explain the existence of magical creatures. Now let's discuss Peter Baelish's disappointing death. Littlefinger was not just the most clever character in Game of Thrones, but also one of the most notoriously deceptive antagonists in all of TV history. Most of the series was devoted to Littlefinger manipulating others and plotting his ascent to power. Ironically, Sansa Stark exposed Littlefinger and had him put to death using his techniques. Even though Littlefinger's death was justified, there was more disagreement than thought about it. Some fans thought Baelish's pitiful demise was the most ironic and fitting way for him to go. Others, on the other hand, believed that characters who were arguably below his level outwitted and defeated him far too quickly. Taking Theo Stark as a king seriously was difficult. Bran was announced as the new king of Westeros at the show's finale. Instead of rooting for Bran, viewers either protested this conclusion or made fun of it. Bran did nothing throughout the series to demonstrate that he would make a worthy ruler, and fans felt that there were better contenders for the Iron Throne. The unintentionally humorous conclusion of Game of Thrones was, at best, the irony that Bran became king because he had a nice narrative. Bran received a reward for his apolitical and unambitious behavior. Hence, his coronation was unjustified. Bran's ultimate win continues to draw vehement criticism. One can argue that Arya was a victim of her fame. Arya progressively evolved into a brutal but one-dimensional action hero after Maisie Williams' outstanding performance propelled her to fame as a Game of Thrones standout character. Arya killed the Night King, who effectively stole Jon Snow's fate in the process. Most viewers didn't mind because they enjoyed watching Arya pull off satisfying kills. Take the destruction of House Frey as an example. Critical viewers, on the other hand, didn't enjoy how Arya's unique delicacy was gone. Game of Thrones praised the flat archetype rather than breaking out the warrior princess through Arya. Next up, let's talk about how Game of Thrones has frequently drawn criticism for how it portrays and treats women. Sansa is nearly often seen as the most obvious example of this issue. In a nutshell, Sansa would be your standard spoiled princess who developed into a ruthless queen after surviving attacks and near-death experiences. Sansa abandoned her former intelligence and compassion in favor of a stereotypically rude behavior. Sansa's tendency to believe that femininity is weak and that her pain was necessary or even deserving didn't help either. It was more obvious to sharper viewers that the writers either didn't understand Sansa or didn't want to. Here's the writer's most controversial decision, which wrecked the series finale. The writing on Daenerys Targaryen's villainous turn was infamously poor. The most contentious episode of Game of Thrones and recent pop culture history occurred when Daenerys turned evil. She completed her narrative as a gullible but heroic messianic person by turning into a tyrant. Being another mad queen wasn't necessarily a horrible or incorrect notion, but it didn't fit Daenerys' persona. Many people believe that the conclusion of Season 8 of Game of Thrones misled and tricked them because the show went to great lengths to make viewers feel sorry for and even root for Daenerys. Daenerys' downfall permanently damaged Game of Thrones' credibility, and it will live on in disgrace forever. In conclusion, the controversial choices made by Benioff and George R.R. Martin during their adaptation of Game of Thrones has sparked much debate. It is clear that adapting a popular book series into a successful television show can be tricky and requires careful consideration on behalf of both writers and viewers alike if they wish for everyone involved to walk away happy at the end.